Hello, Smars here, and welcome to the video commentary for Myth of Eustro, Chapter 2, Harbingers of Terror. Hmm, I don't think I read the chapter name for the last one, but yeah, okay. Um, oh gosh. This one, it starts off immediately. It's supposed to pick up right after where the last one left off, except maybe a few minutes later. And honestly, I have I have no idea what those structures are, what they actually looked like when they were intact. Um, I just kind of like drawing ruins and looking at pictures of ruins or like rune stones, stuff like that. Like the what is it, the Lingsberg rune stones. That kind of like old stuff. Being out there and just sort of an empty field somewhere or lost in the middle of a full-grown forest. Because like when it was when the stones were originally placed, like none of those trees even existed, or they were just like little saplings, and no one was thinking about it at the time. And so I love that kind of stuff. Um, but I definitely wanted the world to have at least at this point for the reader to sort of come across as a very green apocalypse, that kind of scenario. There's like this thing called a green apocalypse, and I think my first the first time I ever saw a depiction of a green apocalypse was it's the very end of Final Fantasy VII. Um, like after the end credits, there's a little sequence that shows like uh, I think it's like 500 years later, after the end of the game. It shows like what happens to the story 500 years later, and in there it actually depicts the world after the events of the game, and it's a green apocalypse. And that was my first time seeing something like that, and I instantly, latched. Well, it's the first time I remember it really uh, catching my eye, but I'm sure it's not the first time I ever saw it. But certainly the first time it caught my eye and made me sit up and go, "Ooh, that's interesting," and an interesting visual. And I just sort of really latched on to that um, visual really, and just kind of kept going forward with it. I guess you could say obsessed. Um, but the Nightmare Forest and really all the Archine, I really wanted um, that whole that whole idea of that they actually ruined the civilized world, and most of the people, most of civilization were living on the fringes, but it's not exactly the truth, because there's actually well, we'll get into that in later chapters. But I definitely wanted a lot of the world that was being explored by the characters early on in the story to feel very empty and spread apart. Like uh, civilizations had a lot of space in between them, where it seems like um, years ago, centuries ago, possibly, um, or however long ago this event took place, which is part of the mystery. Um, the Archine and just the full Nightmare Forest just kind of swept through, and it just ruined everything. Well, a real apocalypse type scenario. Oh gosh, I, I I did want to talk about this picture because right at this picture, right at this image, I knew right then and there that posing this elf woman would be a real challenge. It's just those crazy reversed hind legs of hers. They're really really awkward for when you want to do really cool poses and stuff. And I started drawing her, and I was like, oh no, how am I supposed to do this? How is she going to do half the stuff that I want her to do? She's got these crazy legs. But I'm definitely up for challenges artistically, and so I was like, I can get through this. I can make it around this. I can do this. So I think I kind of was able to depict this fairly well. It looks like she's sort of crouched in this pose, and it's just, it is a little weird, but it's it's hard to, well, honestly, it's hard to know how to pose a character like this unless you have like a maybe a 3D rendering, a posable rendered model of the character that you can test, which actually wouldn't be a bad thing to do. I may do that, for later parts of the story, um, just so that I don't have to really lose a lot of sleep over her posing. Let's see. Oh, well, let's just actually go through and get to the introduction of the gnomes. Um, yeah. So, yeah. Oh gosh, what can I say about the gnomes? So much to say about the gnomes. Um, let's see. I mean, I wanted them to instantly be recognizable as little, just little nuisances. Just really annoying, and not just have one of the character, like the characters go in and say that they were annoying, but they're really supposed to be like my foot soldiers, to the Ninja Turtle world, um, and that's actually sort of how I think of them, or at least initially conceived of them. Um, they were this spin-off of the Koba in Munch Chunky, but in the original version of the characters, in Munch Chunky and let's see, Munch Chunky, Goblin, and Myth of Eustro all originally took place on the same world, different time periods, but the same world. And what happened was just over the course of a decade, the stories sort of morphed and branched out and became their own things, um, and the Eustro world, it took a lot of it, it took a lot of the Eustro characters with it, with, well, at least with Goblin took a lot of the Eustro characters with it, including like characters like Sune and 26, Reduha, and Charlon the Rock Eater. A lot of characters disappeared from what was really just uh, the D&D tabletop version of Myth of Eustro, but there were still stories, and the stories took place. I had the stories written, but then the spin-offs, like the spin-off, or I guess the companion items were comics that I was working on, which were Munch Chunky, which didn't have the name Munch Chunky at the time. It didn't. It had a name called Gas Dragons at the time, GAHS Dragons, and then Goblin, which was always Goblin except for a short period of time when I was calling it Triple Five, until I realized I couldn't use the name Triple Five because there's an old clothing company called Triple Five that has complete and total lockdown on that name. So it would just be a conflict to keep using that name. But what was I saying? Oh, but a lot of the characters moved from that original version of Eustro over into Goblin and then Munch Chunky, and a lot of them went to Goblin. A lot of characters went to Goblin, um, and I feel bad about it now that Eustro has turned into an actual full-fledged comic. Um, I found a home for a lot of the characters that they didn't have a home at the time. So it was definitely okay then. You can't foresee uh, finally getting to a good place story wise with a completely different thing, a non comic story. Um, And so you're going to try to make the one that you're focusing on at that moment as best as you possibly can. And I really felt that taking these characters that were in a world that was pretty solid, and they were, the characters at least were really solid, taking them and then injecting them into this world that needed to be really to be filled out and fleshed out. I felt like I felt like it helped, and to some degree, sure, it did. But enough about Goblin. Um, but I mean, Munch Chunky mostly stayed a close parallel for a long time before it branched out into its own thing. And I initially I didn't know what the Koba looked like um, underneath their uniforms. And actually, I, they have that sort of weird gas mask sort of feature. And so I thought initially, okay, they were. I'll start off by saying, originally when I conceived them, they were bad guys. They were baddies. They worked for like this king, this mad king, who of course spun off into the Crimson King, and then spun off into Goblin. But they worked for this mad king, and it was a lot of there was a lot of really weird elements. This is some really loose and weird stuff. But um, I I thought because of the way that they looked, that they were probably pigs, little piggies, underneath those uniforms, and they mostly had that same sort of look, uh, like the gnomes have now. And eventually they sort of morphed into how the Koba look when they have their uniforms on. And I still didn't know, that shape existed, but I thought they're probably pigs under there. And what happened was when Munch Chunky really took shape, and eventually the character of Diddle actually evolved. She started off life as a duck, and you can see there's like a Munch Chunky sketchbook that I put out, and actually there's a little section in there where it shows sort of the evolution of a lot of the characters, and you see the evolution of Diddle over time, where she started off life as a duck and went through all these different permutations of like a birds. She was like a parrot and all sorts of stuff, and then eventually she ended up a pig. And once she hit that point, and I was really comfortable with that version of her character, and it really fit the personality. I completely backed away from the idea of the Koba being pigs, and then they became penguins in the story, and it worked perfectly with the area that they were originally supposed to be from, which is their version of the Arctic North. It just it's sort of one of those beautiful serendipitous things, where everything's just sort of falls in line, and it worked. And so I went with it, and then I was like, okay, well, we don't need them to be pigs, and then it worked out later on when Myth of Eustro became a story all its own, and it really started coming together. And I said, okay, let's do this as a comic. It helped that I hadn't used the pigs as a species in the series yet, in the Munch Chunky series, they are a species, but not in the same way that they would be in Myth of Eustro. And so it worked that I hadn't used them, and so I was able to take them and turn them into these pigs. I was able to make these pigs like the big bad, just these little minions in this series. And I don't know, I don't know what to say about them. I love them. I often will draw them in like little corners with pieces of paper and stuff, and that's how I really got to know their really obnoxious and annoying personalities, I should say. Uh, it was because I just sketching them, little drawings of them here and there, and just sort of slowly injected the life into them. And that's why I'm really comfortable with them. I will say this: those shades that they wear are very much inspired by Mouser from Super Mario Brothers 2. I don't know. I am obsessed. I've always been obsessed with those shades that he wore, and I you'll see me slap them on characters every now and then. And they just, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about those shades, why they put them on that character. I'll never know. Um, Maybe one of the game designers out there is would be willing to mention one day, but I don't know. I've never heard a reason why he wears shades, but it looks cool. It certainly impressed me as a small child, and it stuck with me. It really it stuck, and I've been obsessing with it and drawing it ever since. Um, Gnome speak. I'll talk about the gnome speak. Um, I had decided actually a really long time ago. Well, at least a long time into in the creation of this series that I wanted it. I wanted to make it more interactive than the other series that I do, like Goblin and Munch Chunky, and I wanted it to constantly be fun and engaging for readers, and I wanted to create a storytelling element to, I guess, really show off the types of things that digital comics can do that print comics can't. And the the actual, the speaking where you can hover over the word balloons, and it actually translates, which is actually supposed to be um, the the FON unit, the info. I'm sorry, the info unit actually translating for the reader, because it's like the reader is sort of just peering into a window into this world, and you're just sort of watching the lives of these characters play out. It's stupid, but I mean, I wanted there to be some sort of fun and engaging element, that would sort of it could be one of those things that you sort of stumble across, and it sort of opens up the world a little bit more. And it I wanted it to look kind of cryptic, and it's mostly because the gnomes are this sort of weird. Well, they're a fringe, I guess, a fringe species. They're not a part of the United Commonwealth, and so they don't actually speak the tongue of the United Commonwealth, which most of the other species that are and at least interact directly with characters like Ramona, like the elves, the Ishtarians, which are humans. Um, oh gosh, dwarves. Um, wow, I don't know. I forgot. Gosh, I forgot them. Goblins, of course. Ramona. It just there are a couple of them that they are either within the Commonwealth, or they're in close enough proximity to the Commonwealth that maybe they speak um, maybe a very broken version of the common tongue, I guess is what would be considered, but not the gnomes do occasionally speak what would be considered, I guess, English. What looks like English, what is just the common tongue. Um, and they have like a broken version of it that they speak when they're speaking to. Well, it'll come up. We'll talk about it later. Because we'll see it in later chapters. We'll definitely talk more about it. So I don't know. I kind of wish that I hadn't actually made that corrupted that corrupted Ark's relic look like I did, mostly for later story purposes. But I wasn't actually thinking 100% about all the different elements of the story. But um, I'll turn it into something good in future chapters. I promise. And I I, I love the bubbling skin on this thing, and I wanted to really emphasize the monsterness of it. Um, it just I wanted it to really be really gross and creepy. And I mean, I love uh, I love like tokusatsu, monster of the week kind of stuff, and just that idea of evolving monsters that you get in those kinds of series. So that's definitely what I was going for with this. I mean, Myth of Eustro is well, it's my Henshin hero kind of story. It's tokusatsu. I've very much I've come to terms with my relationship with tokusatsu and Henshin style storytelling, and my long ignored history of creating it unconsciously and consciously, and just really embracing some of the elements of it and sort of having fun with it, and especially in relation with video games, and how enemy characters will change and morph, and how things trigger their evolutions, and thinking about things like Pokemon, and just how weird all of that is. And I wonder if it's painful for the characters involved changing suddenly. I mean, your entire body structure is morphing. It's like an American Werewolf in London. The transformation scene in there. I saw that as a child. It was horrifying and instantly intriguing. It made me go, "Oh yeah, I guess that would hurt. That's weird." And it stuck with me forever. And I was never able to not depict anything transforming without making it look painful. Because it makes sense. I mean, your body, even if it's magical, your body is still changing, so it's going to be somewhat painful. And I mean, that includes characters like Ramona, but a little bit less so. And probably at this point, she is a little used to it. But we'll get into that. And that's the thing that this series is very much about. It's sort of poking fun at those weird little elements and tropes and things like that, and not poking fun of it in a cynical sense, but sort of poking fun of it in the sort of like, isn't this kind of a weird sort of thing, and sometimes having the characters themselves comment on it, but still make it very much a very normal part of their world, a part of their lives, to the point where they may comment on it, but they won't obsess over it and tear it to pieces. They won't tear it down. They won't tear it apart. But they definitely make comment, and that's certainly part of the relationship that I want to have between the characters of Ramona, Effie, and the elf woman, whose name I almost said again. We'll get to that one day, very soon, I hope. Within, yeah, very soon. But I definitely want that character dynamic, that relationship between them, where they are both comfortable and not comfortable with that aspect of their world. That some things are really, really strange, and isn't it weird how strange some things can be, and how we act like it's just a regular part of life. And that's the thing, it's just one of those things about video games that you don't see a lot of characters question. It's just sort of, it's supposed to be the way that their worlds work, but I love imagining what if those worlds were our world, and then sort of putting a layer of the idea of a multiverse, and that within the realm of, I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but going off in the realm of things like quantum theory and quantum mechanics, M theory, superstring, and things like that, and where different universes they're under sort of, they're different. There can be at least different ideas for how reality is, how it's organized, and so different things will will turn out differently based on, well, honestly, a point before the Big Bang ever happened when the multiverse actually sprang into existence. Right at that point when the first choices started happening and they started dividing and subdividing, um, then you get these different versions of things like gravity. What defines the gravity throughout the entirety of this universe? Well, it could be something completely different, you know, and it will shape the very reality of that. And this is how I approach video games. I look at that, and that's how I'm able to accept how they work. I mean, yes, I mean most of us, we're actually doing this unconsciously. That's how it's it's just that thing. It's what we do. But I have this bad habit of bringing my subconscious forward, and it's very loud, as you can see, and it works its way into my stories, and sometimes it messes them up. But for the most part, I try to have fun with it. And oh gosh, let me try to keep moving forward with this. And oh, I should talk about. I'm gonna actually skip this whole situation where they're sort of hinting at there being something else going on in this. Someone else is pulling the strings. It's the first sort of uh, little trickles of that being an issue with this. And I like sort of doing that, you know, playing the sort of Dr. Claw to the mad soldiers. There are a lot of like soldiers, a lot of henchmen. I love minions, but so with the elf character in this chapter, with the elf woman, I definitely wanted to get across how not powerful Ramona actually is by showing a character who really is powerful and has very a very wide range, or at least understanding of a great understanding of their own powers, and has a pretty varied power set. Um, and I wanted to show Ramona being very impressed, you know, and to sort of get that across that she's still very young and impressionable, and is just now for the first time getting out into the world, and she's never really been exposed to other archaeologists before. Um, Certainly not in action, uh, but oh gosh, this giant sword, the boomerang, this dragon's tooth boomerang sword is ridiculous. But I love giant, ridiculous weapons. I love that. Uh, I wouldn't say it's a video game trope, but it's definitely something you see a lot in video games. But you see it just in a lot of stories, of course, in a lot of Japanese stories. You see it, but hey, you know, it's fun, it's great, and it has this wonderful sort of way. It's a visual cue to show you just how powerful a character is, because it's not something the rest of us could do. We could never wield a weapon that big. But yet, here's someone who obviously has trained and honed their body, their skill, and they can wield this weapon and command it. And then I definitely I wanted to put weight behind it. And so I had the character constantly, like when she's running, she's leaning forward and the sword is behind her. So I wanted there to be a lot of weight constantly to the whole scenario where she's using it. And so you, like this throw, you see like her pitching her entire body forward. And I played with this entire scene, and there are a couple of versions of it where it's a little bit more exaggerated, but I really wanted there to be some exaggeration to the drawing. And I mean, of course I don't mind, because all my art is pretty exaggerated, but sometimes I get deliberately very, very cartoony in order to convey a lot of very, kinetic, just kinetic um, just really just fast movement. When I want stuff to look really really fast, or when I want there to be an extreme amount of weight behind it, like in this case, and I think I honestly I think it worked. I really like the way that it turned out, especially right here when it hits the monster right in the face and it's pushing it back. I feel like I got into and showed a lot of the weight of the actual boomerang sword, and I don't honestly this is the point when uh, there was really no turning back for me. Um, when I was actually coloring this. And when I drawn it, it's hard to know how it's going to turn out when you draw it, because a lot of the work that I was doing, especially on this scene, a lot of what's going on in here is I guess you could say effects heavy, or at least it requires, for me at least, it required layers in Photoshop to create the effect, the visual effect that you're seeing. Um, like the stars, um, the boomerang itself is actually done completely in Photoshop. The stars, the actual arc of movement from the boomerang, um, the the air that's sort of splashing up from the actual grass below, that's pushing all the gnomes and the monster away from it, and then even the little puffs of air that are popping up between all of them too. All of that stuff is there are different layers in Photoshop, and I can only indicate in loose pencil lines on the actual drawing, because at this point I was still drawing on paper. I could only indicate loosely with a red line with red pencil what all this stuff was going to look like. So I wasn't sure until I had finished coloring it, and when I finished coloring it, I really, really got excited, and I was like, okay, I'm all in. I am fully committed. I know where this is going. I know what this. I felt like I had found the voice of this series really at this point, and um, I was fully invested in creating this and going forward with it, and it made me feel really good. I felt really comfortable and happy with how things were turning out up to this point. It was very encouraging, I guess you could say. But it, so much stuff to talk about, and not enough time really, not really enough time, because I want to keep this under, I want to keep it within an hour really. But we'll definitely talk more about uh, Archine once the series has gone on for a little while longer, and you get we've had a chance to see a few more Archine introduced and seen a little bit of diversity, and sort of had a chance to explore the very nature of these creatures. But right now, monsters. Monsters bad, monsters gross, monsters. um, but cats, cats are agile. And that's what I definitely wanted to get across in in a lot of this. But here, you see Ramona beginning her transformation. Cats, well, yeah, they're agile, and so therefore, uh, elves would be agile. I mean, because they're not really noble, like at least in Myth of Eustro, they're not really noble like they're generally portrayed in fantasy fiction, but instead, they're a lot like cats, and they're sort of arrogant and self-satisfying. They're just little snots, and they look really suspicious. They look like they're up to something at all times, and so. Uh, Interestingly enough, in the Eustro world, they're in a top position, if not the top position, within the Commonwealth, simply because they sort of give off this air of nobility, and but they're really opportunistic, and again they're just snots. They're little snots, and they've just sort of propped themselves up socially and politically, and it's been going on for so many generations now that they're in a position where they can't be moved out of that place that they've taken a hold of in sort of the social dynamic. And I don't know. This is how I feel about cats. I like cats. Don't get me wrong, but they're very interesting animals, especially in contrast to dogs. I don't necessarily not like dogs. I like dogs. I like all animals. But I favor cats more than dogs, but it doesn't matter because I'm allergic to both. So, yeah, it's sad. I don't know, it's something that happened. It's sort of a weird, ironic sort of thing. I think that's irony, where I became a vegan, oh gosh, almost 15 years ago now. And somewhere around the 5 year mark, I found that I gained this allergy to a lot of stuff. It's like taking so many things out of my diet suddenly introduced, it made my body super sensitive to a lot of things. And one of them was apparently animal dander. And so that's why I was saying I feel it feels sort of ironic. It's like being vegan, loving animals to the point that you're not willing to consume any animal products, any animal byproducts, anything like that, and then you can't have them around. So yeah. Anyways, elves, gnomes, Ramona, yes. So Ramona's her transformation. Oh gosh, what I deliberately didn't introduce her base form, which is this form. Um, I didn't. I didn't introduce it in the first chapter because I wanted it to be really exciting. The first chapter, at least, I wanted it to be really exciting for people first coming into the story. As soon as they're introduced, I wanted them to sort of be hit by something really dynamic, really exciting, really crazy and over the top. Instantly, hook them. Maybe that sounds kind of bad, but hook them, and then sort of then pull back a little, and then introduce them to the characters, the story, the concepts, things like that, and then bring them back around to the beginning and sort of and ramp it up from there. And another part of it was that her base form is actually it's kind of boring because it's really just strength based is all. It's magical. It's magically impervious to some degree. It's she's kind of got impervious skin, but still kind of boring. It's just strength. Her base form is strength, and then from there it kind of you can imagine where it would. Maybe you can imagine. I don't know. Maybe you're not sure where this is going to go, but hopefully you can kind of imagine where this might go. And it's some of the very typical places that fantasy and things like RPGs would go. Come on. But she looks like a rabbit, I know, but it's just the way that her hoodie looks. It's called an imp horn hoodie, and in this world, imps they're actually not rabbits. Dwarves are rabbits, and imps are lizards of various types. And we'll get it more into it actually very soon, coming up in the series. In the next few chapters, it actually comes up more where I start introducing some of the other species in the series, like the dwarves and imps and things like that. So you'll definitely see more of those, and then we'll actually talk more about this hoodie of hers, and you'll actually see why maybe to some degree why it actually looks the way it does. I do have a reason for it looking sort of like a rabbit. Also, well, I'll be honest, part of it has to do with this very long love affair I have with Shiro Masamune's Appleseed manga, and his character Briareos, who had these who has these uh, sort of long ear-like antenna slash eye sort of things. They're multifunctional. He's a cyborg and he has these things that come off the back of his head and they're multifunctional. They have another set of eyes in them. They have antenna and they pick up signals and all sorts of stuff. They're almost they are so they're kind of a MacGuffin device. They're sort of a MacGuffin, really, in the story. Yeah, they almost they do pretty much anything he wants them to do. Yeah, yeah, but the series didn't last long enough to really see them do a lot of things. But I thought they were everyone looks at them as rabbit ears, and I always loved them. And these actually are patterned after them. They actually have the same shapes on them that his ears do. If you ever look at a picture of them. But honestly, and I'll eventually one day I'll do sort of a sketchbook that shows the evolution of the Ramona character, and especially her suit. And this version of her used to be red and black um, in a version of the story when it was called Shape 9. Um, I'm sorry, Shape 11. Shape 9 was something different. But Shape 11, which really, it was a dumb random name for a story. And I saw it randomly when I was playing in Photoshop. I saw the word pop up and went, oh, okay, yeah. And I used it. This is the naming, this is how naming conventions work for me, where it's just random stuff. It never really has meaning initially. I give it meaning later. I just like the way something looks. Word looks interesting, and then I inject meaning into it. I'll start digging through just the entirety of language. I'll start going through the history of words and try to find meaning in there, and I'll start adding extra, just little bits and pieces here and there. This is what I constantly do. It's how I came up with a lot of the terminology, not just in Myth of Eustro, but pretty much every series I do. It's a lot of it's like that. If it's not a completely made up word, like a lot of the monster names completely made up, but a lot of uh, the words when they're naming something, when they're like possessive, when they're items, articles of clothing, and sometimes the names of people, a lot of times, or even like places like towns or cities or even planets. Um, I often it has some sort of relationship to um, an Earth word, a word from uh, somewhere in our civilization, not necessarily English, but some other language that has been used on Earth at some point in history. I've taken that and sort of distorted the word. Sometimes that's what happens, but sometimes it just they look like it, and I'll sort of make them semi-related. But that's I'm sort of going off on more tangents, but oh, what I guess I was talking about Ramona, the look of her, and how uh, I definitely want sort of an ongoing joke to sort of be um, that a lot of people, I want her to be misinterpreted as an archine, by people, because, like, again, it's sort of one of those things where we sort of take it for granted. We approach um, fantasy in this way from when we're the passengers. We sort of just it's um, it's that suspension of disbelief, where we sort of we accept it, and that this is the way that things should work. And I sort of want to play with that, where no, this isn't necessarily normal for this world. Ramona running around looking like this isn't necessarily normal. Yes, you probably get some very weird and eccentric archaeologists in this world, but they don't normally look like this. And so Ramona, I want there to be a running gag that, she, well, not running, but on occasion where she looks this way and people sort of react oddly to it or completely negatively, where they think she's an archine. Um, and I guess I feel like I shouldn't actually be talking about all of that, all the little things that are supposed to happen in the story, but I can't help it really, um, because it's just it's kind of funny to me, that idea that in stories people are so accepting of how weird things are, and um, I'm mostly worried that I may think too much about these things and spend too much time being concerned about my characters being concerned about it. I don't know, but I guess we're getting close to the hour mark, so I will end the commentary with um, the magic door. So this whole magic door thing, again, harkens back to everything, to video games, to D&D style tabletop games. Um, it's an element that, well, I mean, obviously it's going to show up in video games because video games started life. A lot of the stuff that we are very comfortable with as tropes, and the way that video games work is based on is based on a lot of what was created, the actual gameplay, the mechanics that were created for tabletop D&D style games before them. A lot of those guys moved on, or either they moved on into the early world of video games, or inspired video game creators and developers, I guess I should say. And so I mean, and it makes sense because it's very they have very comfortable tropes, I guess. A lot of the elements in the world of tabletop gaming, it's very comfortable and it makes sense. And I mean, somebody actually sat down and thought a lot of it through, to the point that it's not infallible, but it's certainly, they've covered enough bases that you can get somebody that comes in with the wildest imagination, the wildest ideas, and they can inject all of that in there. They could sit there with people that play straightforward, very boring, calm D&D, and you have this one person that has the craziest stuff going on, trying to really go in there and throw a monkey wrench into the whole works, and they would still fit. They would still fit. They wouldn't be able to break the logic of how these work. Now, I mean, that's not 100% true. Otherwise, they wouldn't do revisions to stuff like D&D. You wouldn't have several editions, and you wouldn't have weird conflicts. Depending on what fan you're talking to, which group of players you're talking to. There's going to be conflicts, and there's going to be disagreements and arguments over different editions. But yeah, again, tangent. But things like magic potions, magic doors, things like that, they come from that. But my original introduction to them, again, was Super Mario Brothers 2. Oddly enough, and so there's a lot of that goes on. Me playing with things from my childhood, and that I thought were fun, both visually and just sort of this, wow, that's awesome. That thing that you're impressed with when you're really young. that sort of it sticks around somewhere with you for a long time. And why not? Why not use it? It works for this world. It makes sense to me. Teleportation. Um, Sometimes there has to be an excuse, and I wanted this to be a perfect excuse. And there have been other places where I have actually seen it, and I wish I could remember. There was something that I remember. Um, I can't think of what it was. Where I'm sorry, I know what it was. Oh gosh, you're gonna hate me for this. Um, I was it's Minecraft. It's Minecraft. There's a mod in Minecraft that I played a few years ago, and it's a mod in there that you can you add on, and it creates portals. But the thing with the portals, and that is really what made me think about the way that these magic doors work. I remembered that experience with these portals, and you open these portals literally. You can open them right there in the ground. You throw your potion down, and it opens this. Well, you don't throw a potion down, but you throw the thing down, and it opens this portal anywhere. You can open it in the side of a mountain, on the ground. Usually you want to, you're trying to get down into mining, and you would open it in the ground, and you can see right down into where you're trying to go, and you just jump down. But if you turn around and you look back behind you, you can actually see the portal closing behind you. And it was this really cool thing where it would just, and it would close at one end, and then you could see the ground sort of merging back behind you. And we'll talk more about this in the next chapter, because you actually see the way that I tried to interpret the what I thought I was seeing when I was playing Minecraft, and in that period, and I tried to sort of interpret that, what I was experiencing and what I was seeing in the next chapter, and I actually show the path through the magic door. But I mean, this is the relationship that I've created for Myth of Eustro, and I want it to be something familiar and across, well, I guess across mediums. I mean, I want that the relationship in my life between things like animation, comic books, video games, all these things, these storytelling mediums, they exist in my life, and they are dominant forces that have shaped the way that I think about story, the way that I think about storytelling, my approach to creating stories, my approach to a lot of different aspects, character design, world building, all these things. And instead of focusing on one path like comics, even though I love comic books and I love comic creation, I didn't want to, early on I decided I didn't want to focus just on the way that world has been built up, the way that world has defined itself as far as character designing and character building, world building, things of that nature, because I feel like it to some degree, it hits a wall, and then I guess it's not fair to say that it's hit a wall, because it's certainly not hit a wall, but there definitely hit a point, especially when I was younger, in the I would say the 90s. It hit a point where it was very incestuous, and you could see sort of the offspring of the incestuous nature of comics creation throughout the 80s. You could see the sort of the result of it in the 90s, and it was this very steroid infused, really absurd, over the top version of itself that just, it had no meaning, it had no direction, and it granted, it was defining, and certainly gave us a way out. It certainly helped us reach this point where we got over that sort of brooding, dark period of our lives. You know, everything goes through that. Every form of expression, human expression, sort of goes through these weird, sort of familiar, very human periods. You know, it's I mean, because it's created by us, it sort of is an extrapolation of us. It's sort of an extension of us, and so it mimics, it mirrors us, and so everything, it feels like, goes through these periods where it has these dark periods, it has these delightful, very young, naive periods, and things like that. And so, I mean, I feel like the 90s, or especially the early 90s, was sort of comics metal phase. You know, it was their metal phase, and everything has it. I mean, obviously, the term that it would, you know, have a metal phase is it's you know, metal. But I mean, even stuff like hip hop. I remember, you know, hip hop went through its metal phase in sort of the early to mid 90s, and it was really disturbing but kind of fun. But I mean, comics, because for me, comics and hip hop, I was into comics, hip hop, and punk, and they were all happening at the same time in this way that, and they sort of worked together, and I loved it. And you know, it was just, and I don't know, and there was, you know, and then I went to school with like a bunch of goths and all sorts of stuff was going on. But um, that's, oh gosh, it's sort of going off on another tangent towards the end here. But it's still, you know, I feel like uh, everything sort of does this. You know, every expression of humanity, every way that we can find a way to express ourselves creatively, it if it goes on long enough through history, it will find a way to mimic every instance of growth that we have ever gone through. And depending on what it is, what type of expression it is, what kind of extension it is, determines how quickly it goes through those periods. Like I would say, technology certainly has gone through a lot of these sort of eras, these phases, and it's gone through them. Obviously, it's going through them faster than anything else because that's the rate of technology. But comics certainly went through this, and I feel like we came out on the other end of it in maybe a much better place. You know, like we are definitely in a better place, a better understanding of comics and storytelling. But I feel like what brought us to that place, as far as, you know, like a lot of the comics creators out there now that are really doing some really amazing stuff, what brought the majority of people to this place was being put up against things like video games and things like animation, which express themselves. The storytelling approach is similar but different. It has different paths that it can take in order to engage an audience. And that sort of, it was like it forced the hand of comics creators. And I felt like that's what happened to me early on. I decided, I recognized that there were other ways, other paths. And so I decided to explore those other paths, which is honestly how I ended up in school for animation. Was I wanted to learn how to animate. I saw it as a wonderful way of expression, you know, a storytelling path, and I wanted to find out how to do it. And I realized I couldn't do it initially on my own. I couldn't figure it out. I could not figure it out. And so I went to school. I decided to go to school after many years of not going to school. I went away to art school and learned how to animate. And I took what I learned there, and I'm injecting it back into the base form of myself, which is comics, and my many years of video games, and sort of exploring the variety of worlds that those guys are creating and the different ways that they can tell those stories. The way that those guys um, explore those worlds and express themselves through those worlds. I'm taking all of these things and I brought that around and put that in there too, and I sort of and it's all sort of meshing together, and I'm trying to find a fun sort of way to play with it and express my love for it through Myth of Eustro. Um, and I mean, I honestly, I think it sort of comes through, and I feel like because this isn't unique to me. Obviously, this is something that is, um, it's it's huge. It's happening. It happened to a lot of us. You know, a lot of us sort of um, found all these worlds. We found all these different worlds, all these different forms of storytelling, and we found them all to be acceptable enough that we never really got attached 100% to any particular one, but we were able to sort of divide them up evenly and give them a home inside of ourselves, and sort of it's something I've noticed has existed across, well, a few generations, and it's interesting because it's a interesting disconnect that I find with my parents, where they are the pre-video game generation, and so they just it just they don't understand, especially like my dad. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand and he doesn't understand why I want to tell stories in this way. He doesn't understand comics. He doesn't understand why I'm into animation and why I'm into video games. Um, my mom maybe more so does, because she was with me. She raised me, and so she watched and she understood. She tried to get to understand, and so you sort of get that, and I feel like that I'm trying to sort of inject all of that, sort of that awkward growth period, that awkward growth period. That sounds horrible and disgusting, but no, that awkward period of growth, for me at least, coming up, preteen, teenager, young adult, these periods of my life were when these things were introduced bit by bit, as not just to culture, not just to pop culture in big ways, but certainly for me in a way that was so defining that I really it's taken this hold of my work, and I feel like it has a way of, I think it took hold of a lot of us in a way that we well, I guess, yeah, you sort of resonate, we harmonize, and we find each other in this beautiful way. And it is the internet. I mean, when you look at the internet, it is probably why the internet is at odds with one another, but in harmony with one another. In the way that it is because it is an entire culture, of us that we sort of grew up in this world, sort of being we grew up sort of being exposed to these elements. At least, those of us that are into these things, you tend to find that most people that are into animation they're either into comics or they can tolerate comics, but certainly they're probably into video games as well. It's just in I don't know, it's just one of those things, and I love that. I love that I can find that common ground with so many people, because I felt so alone for so long. I mean, really, it was just me and my 5 friends through most of my time, through most of my life, up until the internet really cracked open and people really started getting out there and talking and sharing and stuff. And I started going out to conventions and stuff. That'll definitely do it for you. But okay, so final tangent, and I'm going to end it here. And honestly, we will pick back up with so many things, including Magic Doors uh, on the Chapter 3 commentary. But I hope that you enjoyed this and my crazy, crazy ramblings, and I hope I didn't get too annoying. And I'm just, I'm just happy to be doing this and that people are actually enjoying this story. So thank you for watching and thank you for listening, and especially thank you for reading. Bye.